Hi and good evening. My name is Agata Braya. I'm a user experience and design consultant currently working for the digital team at Qatar Foundation. For the past 5 years, I've been an active supporter of the international and Qatari startup scenes, acting as a mentor and trainer for various incubation, acceleration, and innovation programs. Some of the initiatives that I engage with are right here at Qatar Foundation at the Qatar Science and Technology Park, also known as QSTP. For those of you who don't know, QSTP is an incredible hub for applied research, technology innovation, incubation, and entrepreneurship. And it's here that some of the startup programs, such as the Arab Innovation Academy, Stars of Science, or Accelerate, are taking place. Qatar's startup ecosystem is growing up really fast. Actually, Qatar has topped the region in terms of ease of setting up and developing a business as per the 2019-2020 National Entrepreneurship Context Index created by the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. This means that when it comes to setting up and growing a company, Qatar is the best country in the region, according to this global report. But even beyond Qatar, what we're witnessing at the moment is a true boom in startups. The global pandemic, well, of course, it has brought many challenges to multiple businesses, but it also brought a lot of opportunities, especially for startups all around the world. In fact, the number of new companies around the world has significantly surpassed the indicators of last year. It's a great time to innovate. It's a great time to start a new company. But as probably many members of the startup community know, ideas are cheap, execution is everything, and unfortunately, at some point, 9 out of 10 startups will fail. Why is that? Well, this is something that I'm really hoping to find out from today's session. Before welcoming our speaker, I'd like to let those of you know who are joining us for the first time know that Education City Speaker Series is a Qatar Foundation platform that provides people with an opportunity to hear from, learn about, and interact with thought leaders on various topics facing our world. I just want to remind you that today's edition of the Education City Speaker Series is being hosted on Microsoft Teams. If you're joining us from your desktop, you have access to live translations and subtitling in English, Arabic, French, Spanish, and Italian. But you can also watch the live stream on Qatar Foundation social media channels. It's available on YouTube, on the Facebook page, on LinkedIn, and on the Twitter feed. And whichever platform you're joining us from, we really want to hear from you. We want you to join the discussion. We want to hear your say. So the plan is that over the next 40 minutes, our speaker will be sharing his insights on entrepreneurship and innovation. We'll be talking about environmental advocacy, about the role of the value of optimism and persistence in business, the birth of Netflix, of course, and also his successes and failures over his journey as an entrepreneur. And after that, we'll have a 20-minute Q&A session. We'll be putting your questions to our speaker. We'll try to answer as many of them as possible. So I really encourage you to use the Q&A section of this webinar. I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Marc Randolph. Marc is a veteran Silicon Valley entrepreneur who founded Netflix in 1998. Marc was the founding CEO, and over his 8 years at Netflix, he played a crucial role in the company's transformation from a tiny DVD by mail business into a worldwide enterprise with millions of subscribers. And although Marc is best known for starting Netflix, his career is even more impressive than that, and it spans over 4 decades. He's been a founder of more than half a dozen of other successful startups. He is a mentor. He mentors scores of early stage entrepreneurs, and he's also an investor in numerous successful tech ventures. And that's not it. He's also the author of the international bestseller, That Will Never Work, The Birth of Netflix and the Amazing Life of an Idea. It's really a great book. If you haven't read it yet, I really encourage you to do so. I won't be delaying this further. Marc, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Agatha. It is a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. So, Marc, we're all curious. We're all curious about Netflix. If you could tell us, how did the idea for Netflix come about, and how did this company start?
You know, when people ask the question, where did the idea come from? I think everyone is kind of looking for that singular epiphany moment, you know, where you're sitting there and all of a sudden, boom, out comes this idea, perfect and fully formed. But the reality is, it doesn't work that way. I know of almost no company which actually started with the idea that ended up being the successful one, and certainly Netflix was no different. In fact, the idea for Netflix came over a long period of time where I was losing my job, and as was a good friend of mine, a guy named Reed Hastings, and the two of us were saying, let's start something new, and began brainstorming possible ideas for a new business. And we brainstormed literally hundreds of ideas. And Reed and I used to drive to work together. And the way we would do it is he would pick me up at my house, and then I would immediately launch into a pitch. And these were pretty crazy things. And if I could, I'll actually share one with you. I mean, well, I'd get in the car, for example, and I go, okay, Reed, are you ready? Personalized shampoo. We're going to have people cut off a lock of their hair. They're going to mail it to us. We're going to have a team of hair scientists formulate a custom blend just for you, and then you'll subscribe to it. And then the same thing would happen, which is nothing. Reed would sit there. He'd be driving. He'd be quiet. And I could see the wheels spinning, and maybe a minute would go by, maybe 2 minutes. And then he would turn to me and go, that will never work. And he would launch into this entire dissertation of all the reasons it was such a foolish idea. The market was too small. There was FDA approval required. People wouldn't subscribe to that. But of course, I'm no coward here. I would go right back at him. I'd done my research. And we would beat these ideas to death. And we did this with hundreds of ideas, with personalized shampoo, with custom dog food, with sporting goods. And then one day, I pitched him the idea of doing video rental by mail. And this was back in 1997. And when I pitched him video rental by mail, it wasn't such a bad idea because video rental was this huge category. But there were some problems, which is back then, if you remember, video rental came on those big video cassettes. They were heavy and expensive. And so that idea got rejected. And so if there was anything that really created the idea for Netflix, it was a few months later when Reed picked me up and mentioned he had heard about this new technology called a DVD, a little small plastic disc. And that gave us a sense that this might actually re-energize that old video rental by mail idea. And then there was this key entrepreneurial moment. And sorry for belaboring this, but the point is these ideas do take this tweaking. And so the key thing was when we had the idea that DVD may in fact work, we didn't all of a sudden rush home and do a business plan or go to the office and build a pitch deck. We turned the car around right in the middle of the drive, went and tried to buy a DVD and settled for a music CD. And we mailed it to Reed's house. It got there in less than a day. And if anything, that was the moment we said that this idea might work. And Netflix started as a video rental by mail company. And you've seen how that simple idea transformed pretty dramatically over the last 23 years.
That's really incredible, Marc. Actually, that personalized shampoo story, that was my favorite moment in your book. And I remember driving my car and just laughing think so hard at that. I just love that story and all the ideas you had along the way. Mark, you've mentioned, we've talked about DVDs, about the old video cassettes. So when you were starting in 1998, Blockbuster was the undisputed champion of the video rental industry, and it seemed like really an impossible market to get into. But somehow you innovated the subscription and distribution models, and soon you disrupted the entire industry. I'm really curious, how difficult was it at that time to pivot into a fully digital business?
So the interesting thing is that there's a couple of things here. The first one is that when we launched the company, we knew it was going to eventually be a digital business. I mean, it was, in fact, when I went and pitched the idea for Netflix to people, this DVD by mail idea, everyone said the same thing. I mean, they all said that will never work. My potential employees said it would never work. My investors all said it would never work. My mother said it would never work. And they had two basic objections. And the first one was Blockbuster. There is a video rental store on every single corner. Blockbuster has 9,000 stores. Why is anybody going to want to rent by mail? Okay, not a bad objection. The other one was, they go, this is a digital medium, and it is just a matter of time before people are able to download movies or stream movies. And they were right about that. But what they were wrong about was the timing. People thought it was imminent. And I think Reed and I believed it would take quite a long time for people to be comfortable getting movies digitally. It took a while before the infrastructure was built out, before there was bandwidth. And even when there was bandwidth, it would be connected to the office, not to the living room. And more importantly, we said Hollywood is going to be very, very reticent to make their movies available digitally after seeing what happened to the music industry. And so our challenge was, how do you build a business which is relevant today, which will still be relevant when the world changes and you can download or stream movies? We weren't sure which one it was going to be. And there was an interesting point there where we said, we can't make this business all about being the world's fastest shipper of plastic, because all that'll work now in a DVD world, that's going to mean nothing when the world does change to digital. But at the same time, if we had said, we are the world's leading streaming service at a time when it was impossible to stream, that would have gotten us nowhere. And instead, we chose a positioning which in some ways was delivery agnostic. We chose a positioning that said, we are the best place to discover great stories. Because we knew that if we had people think about us as a place to find great content, well, that would work perfectly well in a world where we had to deliver that content on a DVD. But it would also continue to work at a time when we could deliver that content over a wire or over the air. And it will continue to work well 10 years in the future when we can, I don't know, beam movies telepathically into our fillings, or however we choose to consume content in the future. And then all we had to do was make it real. And that led to a lot of the developments early on about saying, we're going to have every single DVD available on launch. We're going to build out a deep content. We're going to build an algorithm that helps predict what someone's going to what's going to enjoy watching. So, people seem to think you come to these crossroads where all of a sudden you say, well, I guess now it's time to transition from DVD to streaming and we'll just change. But in fact, Netflix was working on that for 9 years before it finally actually became possible to do it. And in fact, in some ways, that was what's enabled in Netflix to be such a powerful competitor now, is that rather than starting from scratch and streaming, we had 9 years of understanding what customers like, what content they want to watch. We've established a relationship where they thought of us a certain way. As in most things, you have to make these decisions sometimes and prepare for them way, way before you actually get to that point.
Thank you, Mark. That's fascinating, and that's a good reminder for our startup founders to really focus on a user-centric approach. It's always about the user and solving a specific need, not necessarily about the technology and the tools you're providing it with. Mark, you're often saying that no idea is a bad idea, and stop searching for that one perfect idea to start a business. Could you tell us a bit more what's the thought process behind this? What's the reasoning behind this thought process?
Well, I'm not sure I heard you correctly, but actually the thing that I believe is that not that there's no such thing as a bad idea. I think there's no such thing as a good idea. I think I'm the opposite. In fact, I think every single person here has probably been in a brainstorming meeting at some point where the moderator gets up front and says, okay, let's put down some ground rules. Number one, there is no such thing as a bad idea. Well, I challenge that. I think there's plenty of bad ideas. In fact, I think there's no such thing as a good idea. And let me explain what I mean. What I've learned over 40 years as an entrepreneur is that it's almost impossible to tell whether, in fact, an idea you have is a good idea or a bad idea. There's only one way to know whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, which is actually to try it. And I think it is such a dangerous fallacy to think that I'm looking for a good idea, because the only thing you're doing is validating it in your mind. And of course, in your mind, every idea is a great idea. You can picture it. You can see how it's going to gain users. And all of a sudden, it's going to be a huge, huge organization. And imagine how amazing it'll be when every single person is using this app or whatever your idea is. But what happens is when you finally do take that idea and get the courage to take it out of your brain and collide it with a real customer, you find they behave very, very differently than you imagined. And in fact, the things you thought would work didn't work. And the things you thought that wouldn't work, well, they did work. And that, in my opinion, is the process of entrepreneurship. It's taking these ideas and colliding them with reality. And the longer you wait, the more time you spend trying to figure out in advance if it's going to work or not is wasted time. Because if you keep waiting until you can see around the corner and know for sure that it's a good idea, well, A, it's too late. By the time you finally get the courage to start, because now I know it's a good idea, well, I promise you that someone else is already there. And you're almost always wrong. So my whole mindset is no such thing as a good idea. Every idea is a bad idea. Your job as an entrepreneur is to find out why. And it is that journey that is what I think makes entrepreneurship so powerful, but also so exciting and intriguing.
That's amazing. Thank you, Mark. So we have to validate as soon as possible in real life scenarios, right? And quite often in the startup
I like how you
world,
put those things into into more entrepreneurial words, like validate in real world scenarios. No, damn it, just do it. That's how I say it.
Just do it. And we hear quite often, fail fast, fail often. We hear that we should be learning from failure, that we should be embracing failure, learning from our mistakes. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on who are the ones who actually succeed in the world of entrepreneurship, and who are the ones that don't, and whether there are some mistakes that the ones that don't succeed keep on making. And also whether you made such mistakes along your journey, or whether you have some failures that you could tell us about.
Well, certainly I have made millions of mistakes. I mean, that's just the nature of entrepreneurship, which at its heart is doing something which hasn't been done before. I mean, that is what entrepreneurship is taking an idea which you don't think exists and trying to figure out how it's going to work. And if you think you're going to get it right the first time, you are sadly mistaken. That never happens. You have to try, which means you have to fail. The trick is not to avoid making a mistake or not to avoid a failure. The trick is to avoid making the same mistake twice. And so I would say, yes, I am reasonably good at learning from my mistakes and trying to avoid making them twice. And now that I've been doing this for nearly 40 years, I've got a pretty big list of all the things that I'm trying to avoid doing twice. But that said, there are some patterns that I see that separate the people who are the more successful entrepreneurs from the ones who continue to struggle. And I think number one is that most successful entrepreneurs, in fact, all of them, have this predisposition to action. They do more and think less. When an idea pops into their head, they spend almost no time thinking about how good this idea is it good or bad. Their mind immediately shifts to, what's a quick, cheap, and easy way I can try it? I mean, and a classic example is the one that I started off our conversation with, the story of Reed Hastings and I, basically saying, let's not go research the DVD market. We just said a key tenet of this idea is the ability to mail a DVD. Let's see if we can actually mail a DVD. And we'll find out by tomorrow whether this idea was a good one or a bad one. So that's one. A second one, I'll give you a couple maybe, is that in a startup, there are hundreds of things that are broken. There are dozens of things that are on fire, that are calling out for attention, that are clamoring for you to do something. But you're usually under-resourced, and you usually only have the capacity to handle a handful of them. And a classic mistake I see is an entrepreneur believing they have to do everything. And in fact, they can't. Doing everything means everything gets done about 1/3 of the way. And the skill set is this ability to look at the hundreds of things you have to do and intuitively know there are actually just one or maybe two things that I need to get right. And if I can get those two right, the rest won't matter. So it's this sense of, I call it triage, the ability to recognize that some things don't make a difference how much time you spend on them. They won't make a difference. Some things are so broken that you can never spend enough time to fix them. And there's some things in the middle that if you get them right, the rest will go away. And then the third skill is focus, is this ability to really say, I can dedicate 110% of my time to a very, very small subset of items at the exclusion of everything else. And I've generally found when I find an entrepreneur who has that combination of skills, this predisposition to action, this ability to sense what are the 1, 2, or maybe 3 critical things I have to do to achieve the next stage of my company, and then the discipline to focus on them, that is a tremendous competitive advantage.
Thank you, Mark. So predisposition for action, right? Triage and the ability to focus. I'm sure all the entrepreneurs listening to you tonight are checking whether they fulfill all these requirements. I hope everyone does. So you've said in a few interviews that when you were starting out, there was no such a label as entrepreneur at the time. But nowadays, there are so many courses, acceleration, incubation programs, trainings, coaching. That are supposed to make one an entrepreneur. And I'm wondering, what do you think about that? Do you think that these courses and trainings can really help, or do you believe that becoming a successful entrepreneur is an inherent skill and this cannot be taught?
Oh, it's a great question. It's a wonderful thing that there's so many resources available for entrepreneurs. Certainly the world has changed dramatically since I first began doing this 40, 50 years ago. And that's a key one. And one of the big, wonderful benefits of that is this realization that you're not alone. You are not this crazy person who can't hold a job. You're someone who's just trying to do things that hasn't been done before. And there are other people who are similarly motivated. As well as a lot of the things we've learned over the last 40 years in the category are helpful. So it's become much, much easier to start companies for that reason. The problem that I see is people believing that this education is sufficient in and of itself. And in fact, it's not. It's equivalent to saying there's a tremendous amount of golf education available. Now I can go onto YouTube and watch how to do a perfect swing. I can go and read books on how to play. But that, as anyone who's ever played golf before realizes, that's a very, very poor substitute for actually going out and swinging a club. What's required is the combination of things. And so for entrepreneurship, there is absolutely no substitute for actually doing it. You have to apply those skills. You have to be putting yourself in the position of practicing those things. It is exactly the same as trying to learn golf from watching YouTube, or trying to learn how to speak a foreign language fluently from studying vocabulary. And that's why I encourage people who really do want to be an entrepreneur, well, just do it. Start now. Don't raise millions of dollars and hire lots of people, but do something small. Start a website, sell something, test something, make something. Do something at a small scale, because it's doing it that you actually begin to internalize all of those skills. You're not going to learn how to pitch by watching Shark Tank. You're going to learn how to pitch by pitching. So start doing it. That's the big thing about entrepreneurship that I think is so not emphasized enough. And the last thing, and you've opened this up, so you have to let me go here, is make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. One of the downsides of this glorification of entrepreneurship is people have, I think, this mistaken belief of what it really means to do this. They think it's all pitching and going to parties and launching, and it is not. It's a very, very repetitious, grinding, scary, disappointing and sometimes career where you're doing things that don't work over and over and over again. But if, like me, you're intensely curious about how am I going to make this work? What a fascinating puzzle to solve. It's an amazing career. But if you're doing it because you think you want to be wealthy, I hate to disappoint you, the odds are unlikely that's going to be the case. If you're doing this because you want to solve really interesting puzzles with really smart people, you will be happy every day of your life.
Thank you, Mark. That's really fascinating and very inspiring. You know, when a startup is new and there are young people who are starting a business, quite often they have very big egos, and there are bound to be hard conversations and unpleasant discussions that might be very damaging for the business. Do you have any advice for young entrepreneurs, especially the ones with big egos, how to protect their business from sinking, how to protect their business partner relationships, and how to maybe foster some kind of emotional agility within their companies?
Yeah, it's a really interesting psychological combination that goes into being an entrepreneur, because as you're alluding to, it does require this tremendous degree of self-confidence, because you are taking something that everyone is going to tell you won't work, and you still have to have this profound belief that I am going to figure this out. I am going to make it happen. And each time there's a setback, rather than saying, well, I guess they were right, you have to say, well, I'm going to keep trying until I solve it. So it does require this sense of, well, self-confidence. But it's critical to recognize that if you don't understand as much, learn as much as you can about the world, you're just going to repeat the same mistakes that have already been made. And you have to combine that self-confidence, this belief that I know how to do this, with this willingness to listen to other people, to recognize that not every idea is going to come from you, that in fact someone else may have been down this path before. And if you can listen carefully and really understand what they've been through, that just makes you smarter when it comes time for you to solve these problems yourself. And it's this really interesting dance between being open but yet confident. And I think, and I've forgotten his name now, so I'm not going to give credit properly. A social psychologist who says basically, what you want to do is argue like you're right, but listen like you're wrong. And that kind of is that right balance of recognizing I don't know everything, but I'm going to try and make this happen. And I'm as vulnerable as anybody else. I recognize what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. In fact, I consider that one of the greatest gifts that I've given myself, is learning reasonably early on what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and what I enjoy and what I don't enjoy. And for example, I've learned, I'm a little immodesty here, I'm actually really good at early stage stuff. I mean, I do have this kind of really interesting sense of triage, and I'm really, really good at the focus piece of it. And all the other small skills that go into making a successful entrepreneur. But I'm a terrible late stage entrepreneur. I am awful when the companies get to be 200-300 people and they require a totally different skill set, which I'm the first to acknowledge I don't have. And I have to rely on other people to provide those for me. But having the insight to that has allowed me to recognize that I can take a company to a different place, and then to bring it the rest of the way, I need to find the right people who have the skill sets that I don't have. And I can certainly point to Netflix as being a great example of that. A company that I did after Netflix called Looker, same thing happened. I no longer see those as failures, and that I'm no longer the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company. I go, no, I did an amazing job setting the stage, laying the groundwork, establishing the culture, bringing it to a certain point, and finding the right people to take it the rest of the way. And that's that combination I think is important, which is confidence, but recognition that you can't be great at everything.
Thank you, Mark. Mark, COVID-19 has been a real accelerant of digital transformation for some industries such as edtech, healthcare, or e-commerce. We've seen a huge surge in demand due to the new normal of social distancing. In other cases, the technology changes inspired by COVID-19 were in the form of an acceleration of already existing trends. And I'm really curious, if you were to start a business at the moment, right now, what would it be? What industry would you choose? And I think you're a perfect person to ask, since you're the early stage guru, right? So you get to pick.
It's a good question, and I'm probably not going to be able to give you a good answer. I don't think that way, in that I don't tend to jump into specific categories or specific technologies, because that's not what drives business formation for me. I mean, certainly, though, doing a process that way can be a catalyst for idea generation. You can start off by saying, let's look at emerging categories. Let's look at categories which have been, we're seeing enablement, but it has to interest you. You have to be curious about it. You have to be saying, wow, why isn't there? Or why can't I? Or why is this so difficult? And for me, I've learned I have to wait until that happens, because that's the thing that makes me be willing to stay up all night puzzling on a problem, because I'm so caught in it. But if I had the ability to take a little pill that all of a sudden made me curious about something specific, I'd be looking at a lot of the heavily regulated businesses, which are feeling remarkable pressure now. I mean, I'd be looking at financial tech. I'd be looking at pharma. I would be looking at some of these ones which have healthcare for sure, which have these barriers to entry that are legal. And what they do is they allow these established incumbents to not necessarily be listening to their customers, to be operating using 40 and 50-year-old code bases, to be doing old processes that are now very consistently at odds with what customers want. And when you can find a category like that, all of a sudden it begins to crumble, and that opens up tremendous opportunities. So I think I'd probably do a fintech startup if I really could pick anything. But again, this is not about becoming rich. It's not about becoming famous. You don't need to have billion-dollar businesses. Find something that fascinates you. Find a really interesting problem. Don't fall in love with the idea. Fall in love with the problem. And that's the best advice I can give.
Thank you, Mark. I'm pretty sure that our QSTP will be flooded tomorrow with applications for
I hope so.
fintech ideas. So let's see. We've talked a lot about entrepreneurship, about Netflix, about an entrepreneurial mindset. But I know that there is also a very another area that is very important to you recently, and that is an environmental advocacy. And I'm curious, how did a tech entrepreneur with a marketing background like yourself get involved into environmental advocacy? Why is it so important for you? And how can and how should entrepreneurs include environmental advocacy into their businesses,
So for me, for my entire life, I've had this passion for being outdoors, and it's continued to be where I am, I guess, happiest. I mean, for me, everyone's life is different, but I've kind of realized that for me, balance is three different things. It's certainly, I love working. I mean, I love coming in and sitting around a table with really smart people and solving really interesting problems. And I can't turn that off. And I never want to turn that off. So I will always have that as a part of my life. And I'm married. I have 3 children. I'm married to my first wife, my best friend. And that doesn't happen by accident, especially when you're an entrepreneur, which is another very demanding spouse. And you have to work at that. But there's a third thing, which is I realized to be whole, I have to spend time outside. I have to mountain bike. I got back from 2 days surfing yesterday. Backcountry skiing. I mean, kayaking. Anything that's outdoors with the possibility of resulting in a trip to the hospital, count me in. And what I've come to realize is that some of these spectacular wild places where I get a chance to climb or mountain bike or ski, I can't take for granted. I have to recognize that there is pressure in the world now to do other things with these areas, and that people will only fight to protect things they're made aware of. And I realized that I can't just be I have to be part of the solution here in fighting to make sure that these same wild and beautiful places are available for people to enjoy hundreds of years from now. And the reason I think there's a really interesting integration with the entrepreneurship community is that these are not simple solutions. It is not enough to recognize that we're having deforestation because local farmers are trying to make a living. You can't make these choices between, you can't do this and you can't do this. We're going to have to find solutions that allow us to achieve all of our objectives. How do you provide a living wage for people in large parts of the world where that doesn't exist? How do you feed the planet? How do you do so without destroying all of our natural habitat? And I really look to the entrepreneurial community to do that. And in addition to a lot of the environmental advocacy I do, I'm a fairly large financial backer of people who are starting companies which are trying to solve some of these interesting problems of carbon sequestration or different ways of doing things which have a much lower impact on the planet. And I have a tremendous faith in our ability as entrepreneurs to take on these problems, because these are problems that people are saying, global warming, there is nothing to do what we can do about it. And I say, I've been hearing that'll never work all my life. And if I took that as an answer, we would not have a lot of the things that we have today. And I think that's how I see this intersection between these worlds.
That's wonderful. I hope you'll inspire the entrepreneurs listening today to your talk to integrate that environmental advocacy. And I'm curious whether, do you think that the new normal of social distancing and an increasing digital literacy, do you think that that can be a catalyst for more environmentally sustainable solutions?
Absolutely. I mean, there's good and bad. I mentioned before, I do a lot of surfing. I live in a town which has surfing. And in the last 18 months, the number of people in the water has doubled. And part of me goes, oh, that is so disappointing because it's crowded. And part of me goes, this is wonderful. The more people who are out enjoying this, again, the more people will be fighting to protect this. Places I go backcountry skiing where I would never see anybody, I now see people. And part of me goes, oh, they're destroying my wilderness experience. And part of me goes, this is wonderful. So the fact that we've all recognized that, the fact that we were forced to spend time outside during the last 18 months, I think has shown a lot of people how wonderful it can be to spend time outside. The fact that we have not all been coming into the office every day and having our commutes in each direction is wonderful, because it's shown us all it is possible for us to get a tremendous amount done and then walk downstairs and have a late morning coffee with my family. So listen, COVID has been disastrous for a lot of people. People have lost their lives. People have become sick. People have lost their jobs and their businesses. But I think it's our obligation to look at this at the bright side as well, which is it has opened up tremendous opportunities for entrepreneurs. It has allowed all of us a personal reset where we begin to ask ourselves, what's really important to me? It's forced us to spend time with our families and recognize, wow, this is actually something I thought I was not going to have. My 3 adult children came back to live with me. What a blessing. So in other words, I see, as you can probably tell, I'm an optimist. I see opportunity in all adversity, and I think this is no different.
I can definitely tell that you're an optimist, Mark. And I have a final question now to you before we move on to the questions from our audience. How to prepare our startups with optimism for a post-pandemic future?
The worst thing for an entrepreneur is status quo. Because status quo means, well, the same things that worked in the past are going to work in the future. And in the pre-COVID, we had this world where there was some very, very large companies which were operating in an incredibly predictable and dependable way. They could see their sales and revenue for 8 quarters, 12 quarters out in the future. And then boom, along comes this world where all of a sudden everything is changing. And we all know that eventually things are going to go back to normal, but no one knows what that normal is going to look like. You mentioned before this incredible acceleration of e-commerce, this incredible acceleration of mobile medicine. But what's going to happen in 12 months? Is it going to stay that way, or is it going to go back? No one knows. And that is the most wonderful circumstance for entrepreneurs who have trained themselves not to predict the future, but to be ready for whatever the future happens to bring them. And so entering into a world with tremendous uncertainty is, my opinion, the most exciting thing we've seen in a long, long time for entrepreneurship. Everything is now up for grabs. Everything is going to be done differently. And the people who are prepared to take advantage of that are people who have that entrepreneurial mindset. I'm very excited about seeing what happens and seeing what tremendous change we see, which I think will be driven by new business formation. And I'm in the right place at the right time. I love watching what this all happen.
Thank you so much, Mark. While Mark has been sharing his views and insights, you've been submitting your comments and your questions from all around the world. Thank you so much for joining our discussion. So I'd like to start sharing your questions and comments with our speaker. We have a first question. It's from Gali from LinkedIn. You say to not focus on the money, but can you please elaborate on how young entrepreneurs can succeed who have very limited resources, especially financial ones?
So just a quick reference is that my issue about not focusing on the money meant I don't want people focusing on, I want to be an entrepreneur because I want to be rich. And unfortunately, because we've put up on a pedestal these people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and people who are the richest people, Bill Gates, who are successful entrepreneurs but are the richest people in the world, you tend to conflate the two. But there's millions upon millions of very happy, very successful entrepreneurs who make a good living and are very, very content with that. That's what I meant. But starting a company, certainly there's basically two objectives that every CEO has. The first one, of course, is to provide a vision for the company, but the second one is don't run out of money. So you have to, as an entrepreneur, if you are in a business which is hiring people, building things, have to make sure you don't run out of money. So I don't mean don't pay attention that way. But now I'm going to shift to a third answer, which you may not have anticipated, which is I meet if you remember, the first thing I said, what is the key attribute of an entrepreneur, was predisposition to action, which is when you have an idea, an entrepreneur steps forward and does it. And I cannot tell you how many people I meet who come to me and go, Mark, I have this great idea that I want to get started on. How do I raise the money? And I hate that, because you don't need to raise a penny these days. Back when I was a lad, when we started Netflix, which was 23, 24 years ago, listen, it was hard. If you wanted to do an e-commerce website, you had to write it. You did not have a Shopify. If you wanted to collect payments, you had to write your own portals and your own interfaces to the banks. You did not have a Stripe or a PayPal. If you wanted to do security, you did not have all the security. If you wanted to do testing, you did not have, Optimizely. You had to write your own analytics stack. If you wanted, you didn't have Amazon Web Services. We had to buy our own servers and stick them in a rack. And I'm telling you all this to say that back 25 years ago, yes, if you wanted to start a company, it required money and it required time to figure out if your idea was a good one or not. Now, that is not the case. Now you do have this incredible tech stack available to you. And if you have an idea, you should be able to figure out whether your idea is a good or a bad one in 24 hours for zero money. And the real skill these days of an entrepreneur is not how great your ideas are. I don't want to hear your stupid idea. I want to hear how clever you were about figuring out a quick, cheap, and easy way to collide your idea with reality. And that does not take money. I have never found someone who I was not able to sit down with and figure out a way for them to take their idea and collide it with reality quickly and cheaply and easily. And if you are letting the raising money be a barrier to starting your company, well, you're just going to be in that category of people who always has something else they need. I have heard every excuse in the world. I have to complete my degree. I have to this, I have to that. No, you don't. There's no reason that if you have a great idea, you can't figure out today how to quickly, cheaply, and easily collide that idea with reality.
Thank you, Mark. That's a great challenge. 24 hours, zero money, no excuses. I hope many people will get motivated to try that.
I know this is Q&A with the audience. If we can take 2 minutes, I'll give you an example. Would that be helpful of what I mean?
Sure.
I'll try and do it quickly. So someone came to me. They were in university. They had an idea. It was peer-to-peer clothing sharing. They goes, oh, I know people. I have all these clothes that I don't wear, and I know my girlfriends would like to borrow them, and I know they have clothing that I'd like to borrow. Wouldn't it be amazing if there was an app where everyone could see what everyone else had available and we could all borrow each other's clothes? Good idea, right? And I go, well, maybe. And she goes, my question is, should I drop out of school to do this? And how do I raise enough money? How do I find a technical co-founder? And I was like, whoa, slow down. Let's figure out whether this idea is any good or not. I go, do you have a piece of paper? She goes, yes, I've got paper. I'm a college student. I go, great. I want you to grab a marker and write on the paper, do you want to borrow my clothes? Knock. And I want you to go and put that outside on your dormitory room door right now. And we're going to find out in the next 24 hours whether anyone knocks. And if no one knocks, well, you've learned something right away. But let's say someone does knock and go, this is cool, I'd like to borrow your clothes. Then you're going to find out the next phase of this. What about fit? What about taste? What about style? Well, let's say it goes even better and someone finds something they like. Now you're going to find out the next stage. How do you feel when your favorite blouse comes back stained or torn? Or you're going to find out about dry cleaning costs or how long things are gone for or what it takes to get them back. And you're going to start that entire learning process with a piece of paper and a marker. And you're going to do it tonight. Now, is this repeatable and scalable? No. But you're going to gain all this insight about how to find customers. How many times do they rent? How much should they be willing to pay? How is it harder to get people to borrow or harder to get people to lend? So that when you're finally ready and you're coming to someone like myself to pitch this, you're not waving your hands in the air and saying, imagine if you will. You're saying, here is what I have learned on my own. That's what I mean by quickly, cheaply, and easily colliding your idea with reality. Don't raise money. Don't hire a co-founder. Don't build an app. Just start.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think that this should be what you just said should be played before every prototyping workshop, every acceleration and incubation program. That would save really a lot of time and a lot of work. I have another question from Microsoft Teams this time. It is easy to be exploited when you have a good and a new and great idea. How can we prevent or stop that?
So people always say, how do I do? I don't want to tell anyone my idea because I don't want my idea to get stolen. I mean, which is a version of I don't want my idea to be exploited. I don't want to get exploited. I assume that's kind of what this question is about. And it is such a tragedy to have that mindset because listen to what I've said so far. Two things. One is no such thing as a good idea. No idea survives that collision with the real customer. As soon as that collision happens, you realize your idea was a bad one, and you begin that process of learning and discovering what is a true good idea. You iterate your way toward it. And so by saying someone's going to steal, and so by not being willing to start because you're scared someone steals your idea, what you are doing is protecting something which is 1% of success, which is the idea, and avoiding the thing which is actually 99% of the success, which is the iteration. And what you're protecting is the thing which someone else is going to quickly discover is a bad idea. And they're going to begin the process of iterating that idea, that bad idea, to the good idea. So I hate to give you some tough love here, but get over it. It's all execution. The idea counts for nothing. Everyone, I mean, you look at, Twitter started out as an internal communications tool for a company building something completely different. Twitch started out as an internal communication tool for something completely different. Looker, my company, which we sold for billions of dollars to Google, started out as something completely different than what we envisioned. Netflix started out as something completely different than what it is now. Don't protect that original idea. Start the process today of figuring out if it's a good idea or not. No, if they steal your idea, fantastic. They stole a bad idea.
Thank you, Mark. I have another question from Microsoft Teams. Can you talk about the link between entrepreneurship and ethics? Where is the line between ethical and non-ethical entrepreneurship practices?
So you'll have to save that question for when you have a philosopher on as part of your speaker series about what is the line between ethics and non-ethics. But again, the answer is I don't know. I recognize that there's a lot of bad behavior, and I think bad behavior generally springs from monopolistic practices. And I think that when a lot of these companies get too large, I believe they do act, in fact, in bad faith, and it really troubles me. I am not the person to understand how to solve those problems, whether that's regulation, whether that's splitting people up, whether that's, I just don't know. I'm not necessarily good at that. I believe life is too short to be a jerk. I believe in the golden rule, I guess, that, which is I want to treat people the way they're going to treat me, and I want my company to behave the way I want to interact with other companies. I'm constantly rewriting contracts that my own companies are putting out because I say, listen, I wouldn't sign this. This is terrible. Let's make this the kind of thing that I'd be comfortable signing. And again, being a good person is ultimately more important than almost anything else. So just don't get distracted. But I don't know. I'll have to leave it to more smarter people than me to figure out how to fix the world from bad actors.
Thank you, Mark. Our next question is from Mustafa. How did you maintain your investors' patience during loss reporting period? We hear about companies like Uber, Netflix, etc. report loss for years, but they maintain the investors' interest. How do you do that?
So it's all communications. It's all making sure you have a fit between who your investors are and what your objectives are. There's a wonderful thing I encourage people to find and read, which is Jeff Bezos's very, very first letter to shareholders after they became a public company back in 1996, I think it was. And I read that before we started Netflix. And basically in it, he says that if you are investing in Amazon because you expect quarterly returns, because you expect solid, steady growth, don't. That's not how I'm going to be running the company. I'm in this for the long haul. There'll be many, many years of reinvestment before we show profits. And that was such a great attitude. And I think you have to do that. You have to find investors who are aligned with you, who are willing to recognize what you're trying to do. And the most important thing, especially if you are the CEO, is what we are looking, and I'll put my investor hat on. What we are looking for is not someone who gets it right all the time. We're looking for someone who has their hands on the wheel. If you come to me and say, here's the situation, we're going to have a down quarter, but here is why, I understand what happened, here's what I'm going to do about it, I am delighted. It's someone who comes to me and goes, oh no, here's what happened, I have no idea what's going on and I have no plan. That's not a good situation. So be the person who has their hands on the wheel, and that will solve 95% of your problems.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all so much for your questions. I'm sorry we can't get to more of them. I'm afraid we've run out of time. But before we conclude, Mark, I'd like to give you the opportunity to share a final thought or remark with our audience joining us today from all over the world.
So most of all, I'll say, listen, the very, very fact that you're listening here shows that you're doing the important thing, which is trying to understand more about this whole world of entrepreneurship. But again, the only thing I'd emphasize is it can't stop here. This is something you'll do in addition to what you should be doing every day, which is actually getting out and practicing those things. That's how you learn. That's how you struggle. That's how you figure out what works and what doesn't work. And ultimately, that is how you build a successful, happy, fulfilling life as an entrepreneur, is by actually doing it. So good luck to everybody. It's the most fulfilling thing in the world. And I hope all of you get a chance to achieve some of the success that I've been lucky enough to have.
Thank you. And this concludes today's online edition of the Education City Speaker Series. I'd like to thank once again our speaker, Marc Randolph, for joining us this evening, for providing us with such wonderful insights on his journey as a co-founder on Netflix, as well as his perspectives on an entrepreneurial mindset, such as just do it. And finally, thank you to all our audience for joining us from Qatar and from all around the world. I hope that this session has inspired you to innovate, to disrupt, to start now without any excuses, and to make our world a better place. Remember, you can rewatch the event on Qatar Foundation's YouTube channel, and please keep checking our website, www